In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern, taking a look at a colder period, especially starting tomorrow on December 19th through approximately December 23rd, although some cold will linger into the 24th, Christmas Eve, into Christmas Day, the 25th, where we do even expect some snowfall for the Ohio Valley, the Mid-Atlantic, and into the Northeast. Light to moderate could bring some accumulation, but nothing too major. Now, we're going to see a warm period after that I've been forecasting for about a week now, starting around the 25th, 26th, and lasting at least until the 28th, 29th, 30th, where the chances of cold start to rise after that point around New Year's into early January. There's good reason to believe that the beginning of January to mid-January does look like a colder period. We're going to be discussing a little bit of that today as well. So let's just dive into things. We're looking at the past 20 days now. So this is going to be the last couple of days of November into December. And we do see this colder area where cold has really just been unleashed for the majority of the month from South Central Canada into the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, Ohio Valley, Great Lakes. We've had tons of lake effect snow. We've had some eastern snowfall, especially for the interior Mid-Atlantic and Northeast areas here. And then we've overall had a warmer western area. We call this a positive PNA, and this is actually what causes the cold to move into the east. And we're going to be watching for that throughout this video to set back up, because this would be a huge sign of more cold coming back. So let's take a look here first off at some of our storminess. We were at the end of the model run there, so let's just start over. And we're looking at this evening. And this evening is interesting. We do have some snowfall moving into the interior east again. Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, areas of Canada, into Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine in particular. As we have colder air moving in, there's actually a massive cold front moving through, and that's all a part of this. And that cold front is stretching down the eastern states, down into some of the south central states. I do expect this to set up some thunderstorm activity in this Mid-Atlantic and Southeast corridor later on this evening. So let's see what happens as we move overnight. And here's some of those heavier showers or even thunderstorms that are setting up for this area here. Meanwhile, we have heavy snowfall still persisting from New York up through northern New England, like the Berkshires of Massachusetts, into Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. We even have another snow system setting up for the northern plains. This is usually called a clipper system. And this is going to be a crucial piece of energy for some potential snowfall coming up in a couple of days. Now, this is what we're going to go ahead and just call our northern piece of energy. We also have our southern piece of energy that's going to start taking off up here. The distance between them is obviously very great right now, or at least tonight. But this is going to start to close the gap over time, and they're going to be very close by the time they're in this area here. Now, the closer this southern piece of energy is to the coast, the more potential for snowfall there is in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. If it's further offshore, that's going to basically eliminate the possibility for any major coastal snowfall, although this northern piece of energy should still bring snowfall maybe to similar areas that we're seeing here. Let's take a look at what happens as we move forward towards Thursday afternoon tomorrow, and we're seeing this positive PNA setup once again. So a jet stream, something like this, positive PNA setting up for the west, should begin to bring even colder air into the eastern states here over time. This is going to worsen over the days following this, and we're actually going to see it get eliminated around Christmas timeframe and beyond, and that's going to be what causes the cold to basically get shut off for the time being. Again, northern piece of energy up here. We still haven't seen our southern piece really take off yet, but we see northern plains, upper Midwest snowfall really prevailing for the day tomorrow on Thursday. By the time we reach Friday here afternoon, we can see our northern piece of energy is bringing snowfall to the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, portions of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. And then we have this southern piece of energy here, pretty close to the coast, but not as close as it could be. On this particular model run, they're still much closer than they once were, being this far apart respectively. This piece is kind of moved up there, and this piece is kind of moved down, and you can tell that they're kind of crossing paths a little bit here. Meanwhile, we see a worsening positive PNA, and what I mean by that is the warmer air is spreading up the northwest coast, even over the Canadian border there, and that's a sign of a kind of more prominent positive PNA, and that usually causes the opposite in the east, where we see this cold start to dive even further south when we see that feature. So we should see that coming up soon. Here's Friday night. We see this low develop Friday night. This is approximately 7 p.m. It's well offshore, though. It's pretty well offshore, and we see snowfall again starting for portions of the Smoky Mountains down here in North Carolina and Tennessee, the rest of the mountain range of the Appalachians here, like West Virginia, Pennsylvania, even some of the hilly eastern Ohio areas, seeing some moderate snowfall. When we take this up to the northeast, there is snow showers for northern Pennsylvania and in New York, New England here. That is certainly prevailing by this time frame. We're really getting close to where there's no window for this to trend west at all, but if we continue to see this slowly but surely move westward, that would be a sign that we are seeing more snowfall in these pockets in here. Definitely there's a little bit of time left, but again, if we're like tomorrow night, still not seeing any major shifts, then we're going to be rapidly running out of time for any shifts to occur. We can tell that, just as I mentioned, this worsening positive PNA, or I guess bettering, depending on what you're hoping for, but we do see that this cold is reaching further towards the south in North Carolina, South Carolina there. So as far as the eastern states are concerned, that cold is getting further and further south. As we move into Saturday afternoon here, we see that low moves out. Cold is still left over for the east, and we do have some snow showers there over that interior eastern area overall. We do see a storm system approaching the west coast. This could spell an end to this positive PNA overall, so we'll see what happens after Saturday the 21st. As we move into Sunday here, the 22nd, we see the cold is still located over the east overall here. This pocket here is very, very cold. But our positive PNA is dying out, and we see more of a horizontal look to this warmth overall, and that's not a very good sign for cold to continue over the east. We even have some cooling and some snowfall taking place over the northwest, which is very, very typical of the end of these positive PNA periods. As we move towards Monday here, the 23rd, we see what's going to be potentially our Christmas snow system. It's another clipper. It's kind of meandered down here into the Great Lakes and upper Midwest, bringing some snowfall to Wisconsin, the upper and lower peninsulas of Michigan there, as well as portions of Canada. And we're going to see this overall start to bring impacts into this area. As we take a look at what happens overnight into Christmas Eve, we see there's just enough cold left over for some of these northern areas here, as there's still warmer air out west overall, to see some snowfall for Pennsylvania, New York, New England here. That's Christmas Eve afternoon, and as we head into the nighttime, this is 1 a.m., so right around when Santa's coming, I guess, on Christmas or so. New York, Pennsylvania, New England here, we see snowfall really prevailing here in the northeast, so could wake up to some accumulation, as I mentioned, Christmas morning for some of these northeast areas. Also, we have snowfall happening for areas of California, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, where we might have a white Christmas as well. So the two main areas we're watching for a white Christmas will be the northeast here, and then overall this mountainous west pocket there. As we head towards the morning hour, 7 a.m., that's when I woke up as a kid to open presents, so probably that's when your kids, if you have any, will wake up. And we do see snowfall still falling for some of the mountainous west, and also the northeast, heavy snowfall, especially if you're in upstate New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, unless you're in the very far southeast areas, and then much of Maine here could still see some snow falling as the sun is coming up and a little bit beyond. So could be a beautiful Christmas morning for a lot of those folks. Rainfall for some of the Ohio Valley here, down through the deeper south. So this is going to be a little bit of a dreary situation for these pockets, but not the worst Christmas I've ever seen, I guess, as far as weather is concerned. By the afternoon here, this is 4 p.m., we still see some snow falling, especially, again, New York, Vermont, northern New Hampshire, northern Maine. That pocket likely seeing accumulation by this point because they've been seeing it overnight into the morning, into the afternoon. It's hard to say that it wouldn't be accumulating if this is what we end up seeing. So definitely could be a snowy situation, which I would be so ecstatic if that was happening here. So enjoy it if that is what ends up happening, of course. Even some of Thursday, things get interesting. December 26th, we see another coastal low wanting to set up. There's very minimal cold, but slight potential that some of this comes together somehow. We'll see what the model does here. This is the afternoon hour, but we see heavy snowfall throughout the Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Northern California, Northern Nevada, into Idaho, Northern Utah, Northwestern Wyoming, as well as Western Montana, seeing quite a bit of mountainous snowfall here by Thursday the 26th. Friday here, afternoon, we can see that this does come together for some wintry weather, although it's a wintry mix, some ice, some snow, and overall very, very little cold to work with. So I'm doubtful that this has any potential to become something major. I think we would need more cold air, which it's much harder to see the cold air suddenly appear to be likely than to see a storm suddenly appear to be likely. If there's cold in place and the storm's a little off, that's something that we can work with, and I could see definitely trending in a snowier direction. But when there's a storm and limited cold, that's a lot harder to get these models to kind of change their mind on, if that makes sense. So this is going to be a tough situation to see anything major come out of, but worth noting, I guess. Still mountainous snowfall out west, some rain in other parts, but Friday's a little quiet. Saturday, I've been thinking, I've been watching the models all day here, and I think that the Northern Plains, Upper Midwest, Great Lakes, this is y'all's time to shine here, kind of the after Christmas time frame. I've been watching closely, and I think that there's a lot of potential for some storm systems moving through kind of on this trajectory. So that would put Minnesota, Wisconsin, maybe the Dakotas in prime position, even northern Iowa, to see some snowfall here soon. Whenever we see this kind of trough in the west, ridge in the east pattern, the jet stream usually tracks right around you guys, and that just puts all of these areas in a pretty favorable position. And that's the pattern that we do expect for, again, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th time frame. So heavy snowfall here on Saturday the 28th on this model. I'm buying into that. I think that that's a good possibility. Into Sunday as well, major snowstorm. We do get another cold front here for the east as we approach the 30th time frame, which with some cold moving in. This could be a heavy, heavy rainmaker before we get a little bit colder. The only thing I will say that's making me slightly doubtful is that we do have this pocket of still very cold and very snowy conditions out west, which is more indicative of a negative PNA, and it is quite hard to get significant cold in the east with this feature out west. So I think if we do see cold, it's going to be marginal, at least during this time. As we keep going, we do see that this does kind of lead to some very, very sketchy snowfalls, what I'd call it, in the mid-Atlantic and northeast. I mean, we have some rainfall happening near the Hudson Bay up here in Canada, yet this model is showing, snowfall in Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York. If this was like 24, 36 hours out, I'd be like, okay, it's weird, but it's probably going to happen. But when we're looking at the long range and the model showing something like this, that is very skeptical, to say the least. Very skeptical. We do end up in a very strange pattern. There we go with another kind of Midwest lake effect snow system around New Year's. So again, really good potential that we see some snowfall up there soon. I think this model is having some sort of issue in the long range because we don't really have a ridge anywhere. We just kind of get this really trough everywhere. I don't even know how else to explain this. I mean, where is the cold not going on this frame here? This is a very odd look, and just like I say, when the warmth looks this way, we very, very rarely see one temperature pattern from west coast to east coast. That's what this model is trying to project for the early January timeframe. I think that it's likely going to be a ridge on one side and a trough on the other, whether that's the east or the west. And there is good reason to think that there will be a ridge in the west, trough in the east again for the early January timeframe. And I'm definitely leaning that way if I had to pick between the two. But I don't think it's going to be cold from coast to coast. I'm definitely not betting on that anytime soon. Let's take a look at what the European model's opinion is. And we see this snowfall kind of tonight for Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. Here comes that northern piece of energy, the Clipper, through the upper Midwest, Great Lakes. This is for the 20th, the morning time frame. And what we see is a low even further offshore, which is weird. We mentioned earlier this year that the GFS model, the one that we just took a look at before this, has a southeast bias and tends to show storms too far to the southeast. The difficult thing is when we see the European model further southeast than the GFS model, it really, it's like, I don't know. It's a very, very hard thing to break down, and it leaves you kind of wondering what's going to happen. So we're at a bit of a mystery. Will the low be further offshore like this? Will it be a little bit closer? There's massive implications, but there's enough time for either of these to be true right now. And we have models supporting each case. There's plenty of cold. We do see some rainfall in here, but I mentioned this yesterday. This is likely due to the lighter precipitation. When we see heavier precipitation, it's able to pull the actual cold air that's up there in the clouds down with it to the surface. The heavier the precipitation, the more impactful that effect is. So when we see very light precipitation, it's not really pulling any down. And that makes things a lot more likely to be in the form of rainfall with warmer surface temperatures, if you will. It's not going to be raining at 28 or 25 or anything, but if the temperature is like 32, 33, 34, 35-ish, and you're seeing light precipitation, that's likely rain. But if we have colder upper air temperatures and the surface is those mid to low 30s but not quite 32, and you get heavier precipitation, it will likely cool things down rapidly at the surface and end up falling as snowfall very, very quickly. Now, I know that was a mouthful, but I think that's important to note. As we keep going, minimal snowfall with that system on the European model. We do see the cold move out, just like the GFS model, but for Christmas Eve, we see Great Lakes snowfall. Christmas Day, a little bit more marginal. I mean, there is some snowfall happening there, showers across New York and New England, but this would make accumulation a lot less likely and more of just a flakes type of thing, which is still beautiful. Not quite as much, obviously, but would still be great for a lot of folks. Now, we see as we move towards the 30th, we get a very similar system. The only thing I will say is it's a lot less snowy up here. We get mostly rainfall for these upper Midwest folks. I think that the likelihood is if we saw a more major low here, that you would likely have a lot more cold being pulled down with it, and that would likely lead towards potentially some snowfall in the corridor to the west of that low right there. But we see a similar system, just a little warmer with a cold front coming through, and this will pull the cold air almost in a very similar way. We do get some New England snowfall actually with this one on this model as well, which is crazy. And then we do end up with a more true upper Midwest Great Lakes system here around January 1st, January 2nd timeframe. So both models showing some pretty decent plowable snowfall in the Northern Plains, upper Midwest Great Lakes corridor. I think that that's the type of pattern that we're moving into, is something that favors those areas really well. Again, post-Christmas mostly. So we're going to be watching for that very, very closely. Now, total precipitation here. In the eastern states, we're seeing this get a lot closer to average. Nothing crazy, but this is just good news. This is going to end the drought if we continue to see weeks and months like this. The Northwest seeing a huge surge as well over the past week or so. And overall looking really good. When we look at the total precipitation, it's mostly those two areas that I just mentioned where we see the above average precipitation. We do see some in the Great Lakes and upper Midwest here with that snowfall mostly. And then we see areas across the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast as well in the above average category. Now, as far as snowfall, there's going to be a lot of similarities here. Large amounts out west, which is almost every week ever in the winter. Northern Plains, upper Midwest, Great Lakes, we're going to see plowable amounts on both models. And then the Northeast and some exclusive areas of the Mid-Atlantic, it's going to be the same story. And I'm going to be bold enough to leave the drawings on screen, and let's look at the European model. And similar. Okay, so there is some differences, obviously, in the placement, but when we look at the three circles, very large amounts in the West overall, check. Plowable amounts here in the Northern Plains, upper Midwest, Great Lakes, check. And then same story here for a lot of the interior Mid-Atlantic and a lot of the Northeast as well. Also going to get a check mark there. So we're getting pretty good agreement in terms of snowfall on both models, although amounts and exact locations vary a little bit here, obviously. We are seeing all three of those crucial things being true on both here, which is a good sign for it basically panning out. When we look at the temperature pattern overall, again, we're a little warmer, and by a little bit, I mean quite a bit, especially if you're in the southeast like me. I mean, we are seeing beautiful, beautiful weather. Cooling down as soon as Thursday. This is Thursday afternoon. Starting to see below average here in the Northern Plains, Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast. These areas are cooling, and meanwhile, we have a very mild pattern setting up out west for the time being, which is going to continue to encourage the cold to move into the east very shortly after this. So let's see what happens shortly after this. And we see by Friday, this is only intensifying. So 19th, 20th, 21st here, very cold in the east. 22nd, 23rd, it's very exclusive here for the East Coast. By the 23rd time frame, pretty warm for most of the West and the Central states by this point. And by the time we reach the 24th, it's almost coming to an end there in the East. And by Christmas Day, it actually pretty much is. And immediately what we're seeing is some growing cold along the western seaboard. It's likely to expand a bit here. So let's see, by the 26th, 27th, 28th, all of a sudden, we're seeing colder temperatures really taking over for the west than what we have been seeing. And again, that's a negative PNA. That encourages the opposite. So warmth in the central and eastern states, which is exactly what we're seeing here. By the time we're reaching near the New Year's point, we do get a cool down pretty quickly after that. As you can see, around that early January timeframe, some colder air is able to make its way into the east. Still a little bit doubtful, and I want to see this die down. This negative PNA is very strong, and I would find it very hard to see significant cold in the east as long as this western feature is still there. When we look at the European model, I'm going to look for any disagreements here, but we're not going to find it in the near term. The cold is, again, 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, maybe a little cooler, a little more lingering here going on for the East Coast. I mean, even beyond Christmas, we're not getting quite as warm for the East Coast. And we don't quite see the cool down moving in yet on the European model. It doesn't go out quite as far. We're missing, like, I think it's how many hours is the GFS model? Let's check. 384. So we're missing like approximately 24 hours here. So this is one less day. But we're seeing the cold start to spread eastward here. But again, still this cold air is going to be present over the west, which we do need to see change for any significant cold in the east, in my opinion. With all that being said, we're going to continue to track the upcoming pattern with you guys every single day. So be sure to subscribe. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.